Welcome to the session on Aesthetics of Romanticism. Romanticism was an artistic movement that took place during the late 18th century in Europe. It chose intuition and emotion over rationalism. This, together with the ideologies and events of the French Revolution, laid the foundations from which both Romanticism and the Counter-Enlightenment emerged. At that time, Europe was engrossed in an industrial revolution, and society began to challenge conventional forms of neoclassicism in art, music, and literature. The generation of revolution and wars, of stress and upheaval, produced doubts on the security of the age of reason. Doubts and pessimism now challenged the hope and optimism of the 18th century. People felt a deepened concern for the metaphysical problems of existence, death, and eternity. It was in this background that Romanticism was born. The essential spirit of Romanticism was one of revolt against an established order of things. Romanticists fought against precise rules, laws, dogmas, and formulas that characterized classicism in general and the late 18th century neoclassicism in particular. They praised imagination over reason, emotions over logic, and intuition over science, and thus made way for a vast body of literature of great sensibility and passion. The term romantic first appeared in the 18th century English and originally meant romance-like, that is, resembling the fanciful character of medieval romances. In the 17th century, we find the word employed in two different senses. When the Englishman Thomas Bailey used the adjective romantic for the first time in 1650, it was to criticize the untruth of fictional writings. At the same period, romantic was applied in a positive sense to the landscape paintings of Claude Lorraine, Nicolas Poussin, and Salvator Rosa. So, in parallel to the motley, untamed inventiveness of the fictional world, we have the picturesqueness of depictions of nature informed with emotion. Later, it began to suggest a movement whose central characteristics were revolt, self-expression, and individual uniqueness. Beginning in the last decades of the 18th century, it transformed poetry, the novel, drama, painting, sculpture, all forms of concert music, especially opera and ballet. The roots of Romanticism can be traced in the work of Jean-Jacques Rousseau and Immanuel Kant. Other philosophers and writers associated with the Romantic movement include Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph von Schelling, and George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel in Germany, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and William Wordsworth in Britain. Philosophically, Romanticism represents a shift from the objective to the subjective. The importance of Romantic philosophy in aesthetics can be delineated through a simple example. Imagine three people looking at a landscape. One is a farmer, another a property developer, and the third an artist. The farmer would see the potential for raising crops and livestock, the property developer the chance to build houses, and the artist at the shades and subtleties of color and form. None of these individuals is seeing the landscape objectively. They are seeing it from a particular or subjective viewpoint. The move from the objective to the subjective is a result of Kant's idea that human beings do not see the world directly, but through a number of categories. We do not directly see things in themselves. we only understand the world through our human point of view. If we agree with Kant that we can never know things in themselves, we may as well discard them. This leads to idealism, the belief that what we call the external world is somehow created by our minds. The Enlightenment's emphasis on the empirical deterministic universe left little room for the freedom and creativity of the human spirit. The Romantic emphasis is on art, and imagination is a direct critical reaction to the mechanical view of some Enlightenment figures. The Romantic landscapes are a good example for this. In landscape art, Romantics picked subjects that elevated nature, often dwarfing the human in comparison. Sometimes Romantic art depicted sentimental and heroic figures. These seemed small in relation to the forces of nature. Yet humanity remained a focal point of their work. Nature is portrayed as vague, powerful, and barely restrained. Frederick's Wanderer Above the Sea and Fog shows a solitary gentleman looking out over a seascape with breakers smashing against the shore. The figure seems to contemplate the elements with stoic determination mixed with admiration and awe. The wanderer is focused on nature, even while all of nature seems focused upon him. The ideas of Jean-Jacques Rousseau about nature and simplicity, from Johann Gottfried Herder, who rejected classicism and searched for authenticity of the true people, and the fascination with medieval times, they all seem to meet harmoniously in Frederick's paintings. In Romantic age, instead of an aesthetics based on inescapable values, there developed in England and France a doctrine of the beautiful based on individual taste and sensibility. The feeling and sentiment of the individual artist and viewer of art now became the key factor. Ultimately, this implied a turn to a psychological approach to art, which by the middle of the 19th century began to concentrate on its more sensational aspects. In the book A Philosophical Enquiry into the Origins of Our Ideas of the Sublime and Beautiful, published in 1757, Edmund Burke paved the road to an aesthetics of awesome and pleasurable terrors. After Burke's attempt to base the visual arts on a theory of human passions, the categories of the grand and sublime, the archaically rugged, the mental stimuli provoked by the bizarre, obscure, chaotic, even the shock effects which exposed the depths and abysses of the human soul, came increasingly to figure in European thinking as the motive forces behind truly compelling works of art. Around the time of Burke's treatise, the concept of the picturesque became a key term. The word connoted psychological moods triggered by certain themes and also by certain modes of formal depiction. Uvedale Price published essays on picturesque in 1795. Followed by this, around the turn of the century, Richard Payne Knight argued that picturesqueness was based above all on values of light and color. A short time later, this was put into practice by William Turner in watercolors and oils of a decidedly romantic flavor. Now let us look at the contributions of some other important thinkers who played major roles in shaping the Romantic age. Generally, these thinkers felt that for human beings, it was our own day-to-day living that was the center of our search for the truth. Reason and the evidence of our senses were important, no doubt, but they mean nothing to us unless they touch our needs, our feelings, our emotions. Only then do they acquire meaning. This meaning is what the Romantic movement is all about. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is considered as the intellectual father of Romanticism. For Rousseau, habits, values, rules and standards imposed by a civilization grounded in reason and reason only had to be abandoned. Man is born free and everywhere he is in chains, Rousseau had written. Whereas the philosophers saw man in common, that is, as creatures endowed with reason, the Romantics saw diversity and uniqueness, that is, those traits which set one man apart from another and traits which set one nation apart from another. Discover yourself, express yourself was the slogan of the Romantic artists. Play your own music, write your own drama, paint your own personal vision, live, love and suffer in your own way. The Romantics were passionate about their subjectivism, about their tendency towards introspection. Rousseau's autobiography, The Confessions, began with the following words: I am commencing an undertaking hitherto without precedent and which will never find an imitator. I desire to set before my fellows the likeness of a man in all the truth of nature, and that man myself alone. I know the feelings of my heart and I know men. I am not made like any of those I have seen. I venture to believe that I am not made like any of those who are in existence. If I am not better, at least I am different. Arthur Schopenhauer. Arthur Schopenhauer was born in February 22nd, 1788 in Danzig, Prussia. In 1819, he published his greatest work, The World as Will and Idea. To Schopenhauer, the phenomenal world is basically an illusion. The true reality, Kant's thing in itself, he refers to as will. It is out of the will that everything derives, but it has more the qualities of a force and pushes or drives what we perceive as the phenomenal world. Will is the inner nature of all things. So, if you want to understand some things or someone's inner nature, you need only look within yourself. So, the will also drives us through our instincts. Aesthetic salvation, seeing the beauty in something or someone, he believed, is one of the ways to get past suffering. When we do this, we are actually looking at the universal or essence behind the scene, which moves us in turn towards the universal subject within ourselves. This quiets the will that forces us into the phenomenal world. Schopenhauer believed that music was the purest art, one step from will. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Goethe was born in 1749 in Frankfurt am Main in Germany. Goethe's greatest work is his two-part play Faust. Although he began writing it in 1773, it would not be finished until 1831. The first part, however, could stand alone and it was completed in 1808. Its theme was human freedom and the power of passion. In addition to his poetry, novels and plays, Goethe spent considerable time on science. He studied medicine, anatomy, physics, chemistry, botany and meteorology. In 1792, he completed the two-part contributions to optics and in 1810 the three-part on the theory of colors. He truly believed that it was these works that would be his greatest contributions. Instead, few scientists approved of them and they were to make little serious impact on the field. His work would make an impression on various artists, though including Turner, Klee and Kandinsky. His approach was really more phenomenological than experimental, and his work reflected more on the subjective experiences of color and light than on their physics. Schelling and Coleridge. Schelling agreed with Kant that the only object we have direct knowledge of is consciousness. The external world is seen as an adjunct to what is more real, the mind. The way that the mind will come to full awareness of itself is through art. Coleridge was interested in the psychology of artistic creativity and was dissatisfied with the empiricist idea that the mind was merely a passive absorber of impressions. After reading Schelling and other idealists, he found a way to criticize the over-mechanical view of the Enlightenment. The mechanical view of the mind is atomistic. It is simply the sum of its experience. Coleridge saw the mind more in organic terms, its functions more like an organism than an engine. The organism can be creative, but it is difficult to see how an engine could create poetry. Coleridge felt that his version of idealism could be reconciled with his Christian beliefs and that Kant's moral theories were in tune with Christian sentiments. Coleridge thought that intellectuals had an important role in disseminating culture in order to bring society closer to a state of harmony. Hegel. G.W.F. Hegel was the most influential of the German idealist philosophers, perhaps the most important philosopher since Kant. He became a professor at Heidelberg in 1816 and was professor of philosophy at Berlin from 1818 until his death in 1831. Like other idealists, he agrees with Kant that the mind is not simply a passive absorber of the external world, but actively organizes it. As the mind cannot know things in themselves, what becomes the real is Geist, mind, spirit or soul. As Hegel says, the real is the rational and the rational is the real. Hegel sees Geist developing through history, each period having a Zeitgeist, a spirit of the age. These stages will eventually reach the telos, Greek for end, of self-understanding, that is when Geist comes to know itself. He called this process dialectical. A dialectical process is one in which a starting position, the thesis, proves to be inadequate and so throws up its opposite, the antithesis. Both of these positions are unsatisfactory and progress will only occur when a superior understanding occurs. It is only when Geist comes to know itself that we can be free. It is only possible to be free if we understand reality. If we do not understand reality, we are not in a position to make a free judgment. We struggle in vain against that which we do not understand. For Hegel, each person's individual consciousness or mind is really part of the absolute mind. It is just that the individual does not realize this. If we understood that we were part of a greater consciousness, we would not be so concerned with our individual freedom. We would agree with to act rationally in a way that did not follow our individual caprice. By following the real or the rational, each individual would achieve self-fulfillment. The true content of romantic thought, Hegel writes, is absolute internality, the adequate and appropriate form of which is spiritual subjectivity or conscious personality as comprehension of its own independence and freedom. Following Hegel, two different interpretations of Hegelianism spawned two different groups. The old Hegelians who uncritically accepted Hegel's views and the young Hegelians who wanted to continue the revolution of ideas using Hegel's dialectics. Ludwig Feuerbach and Karl Marx were the most influential of these. Soren Abe Kierkegaard. Soren Kierkegaard was born in Copenhagen on May 5, 1813, the youngest of 7 children. In 1843, he published Either Or. It takes the form of an argument about how to live life between an aesthetic man and an ethical man, very probably reflecting two aspects of Kierkegaard's own soul. The aesthetic man is basically a hedonist and an atheist. Although he is portrayed as a refined gentleman, his sections of the book are rambling, suggesting that his life is likewise without focus. The ethical man is adjudged, and his arguments are far more orderly and eloquent. He spends considerable time analyzing the ancient Roman Emperor Nero and his mental states. Throughout his works, he was concerned with passions. He defined anxiety, for example, as the dizziness of freedom. Despair is what the hedonist feels when he finally recognized the emptiness of his life. Guilt is what the ethical man feels when he inevitably discovers his inability to forgive himself. These definitions would profoundly influence a number of later philosophers and writers. Kierkegaard is often considered the first existentialist, mostly because of the way he used the word existence. He said that God doesn't exist because he is eternal. Only people exist because they are always an unfinished product. And the nature of existence is, first, that it is the domain of the individual, and second, that individual must take responsibility for his or her own creation. There is little doubt the great masters of the Romantic period influenced each other, and the mood of the age crossed disciplines. There can be no doubt that Romanticism, though it had an enormous resonance in Germany, was a phenomenon that pervaded all of Europe during the late years of the 18th century and the transition period to an industrialized society in the 19th. It even occasionally overlapped the borders of Europe, for instance, stimulating American painters of the late 19th century to develop a unique version of the style, above all in the field of landscape painting. As far as the unreal and eerie, the dark and evil ingredients of the Romantic mood are concerned, sufficient examples are found in English and French literature and art, where they were indeed often carried to extremes, giving rise to the concept of black romanticism. One power possessed by the Romantic, a power distinct and superior to reason, was imagination. Imagination might apprehend immediate reality and create in accordance with it. The Romantics did not merely say that there were irrational ways of intuiting reality. They rejected materialism and utilitarianism as types of personal behavior and as philosophies. They sought a regeneration we can liken to that of the medieval heretic or saint. They favored selfless enthusiasm, an enthusiasm which was an expression of faith and not as the product of utilitarian calculation. Emotion, unbridled emotion, was celebrated irrespective of its consequences. The three theses of Romanticism can be summarized as: first one, the universe is a single unified whole. Everything is connected to everything else. The world is not simply a collection of unrelated atomic particles and isolated minds. Second, the universe is full of values, tendencies and life. The universe is not composed merely of lifeless matter. It is not completely objective, consisting only of the formal mathematical properties of matter extended in space and time. Third, reason, objectivity, and analysis radically falsify reality by breaking it up into disconnected lifeless entities. The best way of perceiving reality is through some subjective feelings or intuition, through which we participate in the subject of our knowledge instead of viewing it from the outside. We have discussed some of the major thinkers and their concepts which shaped the Romantic age. Now let us wind up this session with a quote from Isaiah Berlin. For the Romantics, Berlin says, "In the realm of ethics, politics, aesthetics, it was the authenticity and sincerity of the pursuit of inner goals that mattered. This applied equally to individuals and groups, states, nations, movements. This is most evident in the aesthetics of Romanticism, where the notion of eternal models, a Platonic vision of ideal beauty which the artist seeks to convey, however imperfectly, on canvas or in sound, is replaced by a passionate belief in spiritual freedom, individual creativity. The painter, the poet, the composer do not hold up a mirror to nature, however ideal, but invent. They do not imitate the doctrine of mimesis, but create not merely the means, but the goals that they pursue. These goals represent the self-expression of the artist's own unique inner vision to set aside, which in response to the demands of some external voice, church, state, public opinion, family, friends, arbiters of taste, is an act of betrayal of what alone justifies their existence for those who are in any sense creative." Here are some questions for you. Romantic art movement did not produce any normed artistic style. Why? Discuss the works of William Blake, Goya, and John Constable according to the concepts of Romantic philosophy. Books for reference: K. Clark, The Romantic Rebellion, 1974. H. Horner, Romanticism, 1979. C. Rosen and H. Zerner, Romanticism and Realism, 1984. A. K. Wiedemann, Romantic Roots in Modern Art. Brown Marshall, The Cambridge History of Literary Criticism, Volume 5. Romanticism, Cambridge, UK, 2000. Hegel, G.W.F. Aesthetics, Lectures on Fine Art, translated by T.M. Knox, Oxford, 1975. Hills, Frederick W. and Harold Bloom, From Sensibility to Romanticism, Essays presented to Frederick A. Pottle, London, Oxford and New York, 1965. Day Iden, Romanticism, 1996. Routledge. Ferber Michael, 2010. Romanticism, A Very Short Introduction. Oxford and New York, Oxford University Press. Berlin Isaiah, 1999. The Roots of Romanticism, London, Cato and Windus. Here we end this session on aesthetics of Romanticism. We will meet again with another topic in the next session. Till then, bye.